HOA, Karen forced my pregnant wife to remove her gown during labor. Police called soon. The first scream I heard that night wasn't from my wife in labor, it was from the woman yelling at her. We were supposed to be meeting our daughter for the first time. The faint hum of heart monitors, the soft beeps, the sterile smell of antiseptic, everything felt calm, sacred even. But that peace shattered when Karen, our HOA president, stormed into the maternity ward like she owned the place. "Ma'am, you can't wear that here," she barked, pointing at my wife's hospital gown. "It's indecent. There are men in this hallway." My wife clutched the front of her gown, trembling. She was 9 months pregnant, sweating, in pain, barely able to breathe through contractions, and this woman was lecturing her about modesty and neighborhood decorum. "Karen, please, this is a hospital," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But inside, my blood was boiling. "You don't belong here." Karen's eyes snapped toward me, cold and self-righteous. "I do belong here. I chair the Community Standards Committee, and your wife's behavior reflects poorly on Maplewood Estates. She should cover up before someone reports her." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My wife, shaking, whispered, "I just need to breathe." The nurses rushed over, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "Ma'am, you need to leave," one of them said firmly. But Karen wouldn't move. She jabbed a finger at my wife's chest, voice rising. That's when the intercom crackled overhead. "Security to labor and delivery, room 204. Before you hear what happened next, tell me, if someone humiliated your wife during childbirth, what would you have done?" Because in that moment, I promised myself one thing: Karen was going to regret ever walking into that room. Before that night, I thought nothing could disturb the peace we'd built. My wife, Sarah, and I had been counting down the days to our baby's arrival with the kind of excitement only first-time parents know. We lived in a quiet cul-de-sac under the Maplewood HOA, a place that promised order, beauty, and community. What they didn't tell us was that one person, Karen Whitmore, was the community. Karen ran the HOA like a queen overseeing her kingdom. Every mailbox color, every flower bed, every lawn height passed under her scrutiny. I used to laugh about it. "At least she keeps things clean." I'd tell Sarah whenever another reminder email came in with words like noncompliance or community standard violations. But it stopped being funny after Karen's obsession turned personal. A week before the delivery, we got a notice claiming our front lawn decorations, a small pink ribbon, and a sign that said it's a girl, were distracting to traffic. Sarah, already exhausted from back pain and swollen feet, just stared at it in disbelief. "Does she think balloons can cause an accident?" she muttered. I tried to shrug it off. She's just being Karen. But the harassment didn't stop there. 2 days before Sarah's due date, Karen actually came by while I was cleaning the car. She leaned over the fence, clipboard in hand, and said, "You'll make sure the hospital doesn't send any banners or welcome signs, right? We don't allow excessive displays." "Karen," I said, trying to be polite, "we're having a baby, not a parade." She narrowed her eyes. "Rules apply to everyone." That was Karen's mantra. She'd even used it once when a veteran neighbor forgot to bring in his trash bins after surgery. "Rules apply to everyone," she told him, handing him a citation. Still, I never imagined she'd follow us into a hospital. The day Sarah went into labor, she was radiant despite the pain. We rushed to St. Mary's Hospital under the glowing streetlights, the scent of rain still fresh on the air. As we wheeled her into the delivery room, I felt a strange calm, a feeling that our life was about to change forever. And it did, just not in the way we hoped. It started with a phone call. Sarah was already admitted, breathing through contractions while nurses checked her vitals. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the room, steady and reassuring. I remember holding her hand, whispering, "You're doing great, baby," when my phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID made my stomach drop, Karen Whitmore. At first, I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. Finally, I answered, whispering harshly, "Karen, this isn't a good time." Her voice came sharp through the speaker. "I've received reports that your car is parked in a fire lane outside the hospital. That's a violation of both city and HOA code." I blinked, stunned. "Karen, my wife is in labor." That doesn't exempt you from the rules, she replied. It sets a bad example for the neighborhood. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Sarah squeezed my hand, her face contorted in pain. Was that? Yeah, I sighed. Don't worry about it. But Karen wasn't done. An hour later, as nurses prepped Sarah for delivery, the door opened, and there she was. Karen, clipboard in hand, HOA badge clipped proudly to her royal blue shirt with golden yellow trim. My jaw dropped. Karen, how did you even? She held up her hand. I followed up personally. Your parking violation was just the start. I also need to address a complaint regarding public decency. Your wife was seen in an exposed state near the window during admission. That violates hospital policy and community standards. Sarah gasped, clutching her gown tighter. I'm in labor. I wasn't posing for anyone. Karen stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the sterile air. You're still a resident of Maplewood Estates, and our rules don't stop just because you're at a hospital. A respectable woman would dress appropriately. That's when one of the nurses stepped forward. Ma'am, you can't be in here. This is a restricted area. Karen smirked. I have the right to file a formal conduct report if she's representing our community while looking like, get out, I said, stepping forward. My voice was low, trembling with anger. Before I call the cops, Karen tilted her head, unbothered. Call whoever you want. Rules are rules. The nurse motioned to security, but Karen brushed past her. She stopped at Sarah's bedside, lowering her voice. You'll thank me later, dear. Modesty matters. That was the first strike, the moment she crossed a line no one should ever cross. I thought she'd leave after that. I thought humiliation would be enough for her. But for Karen, control wasn't just a habit. It was an addiction. And the next time she showed up, she brought chaos with her. Karen's outburst at the hospital should have been the end of it, but instead, it was the spark that lit everything on fire. By the time Sarah delivered that night, word had already spread through our neighborhood. When I stepped outside the next morning to grab coffee, two of our neighbors stood by their mailboxes whispering. They fell silent when they saw me. One muttered, heard about the incident at St. Mary's, as if it were community gossip, not my wife's humiliation. I later found out Karen had emailed the entire HOA board from her tablet in the hospital parking lot. Subject line, concerning conduct by Carter family. In her version, my wife had exposed herself in public view during a medical emergency and caused embarrassment to Maplewood Estates. The HOA chat group lit up like fireworks. People debated whether hospital behavior fell under community jurisdiction. Some even defended her. Karen's just enforcing standards. One comment said, decency matters. I wanted to scream. My wife had just given birth, still weak, still trembling from everything, and now she was being turned into a scandal. Back home, things got worse. We returned 2 days later to find a letter taped to our door. It was stamped with the HOA seal. Notice of violation, inappropriate public conduct. The words burned like acid. Sarah broke down right there, in the driveway. I can't take this anymore, she sobbed. I didn't do anything wrong. I tried to comfort her, but my hands were shaking. You didn't. She's just trying to destroy us. That night, I went through my emails. Dozens of messages from neighbors, some kind, most silent. But one stood out. It was from a nurse at St. Mary's who'd seen everything. She wrote, I recorded her yelling. If you ever need it, I have proof. I stared at that message for a long time. Proof. For the first time, I had something real to hold on to. Before you hear what happened next, tell me, have you ever met someone so obsessed with power they'd ruin lives to feel in control? Because that's exactly what Karen did next. The following day, she called a special HOA meeting. The agenda? Decorum and moral fitness of residents. But this time, I wouldn't sit quietly. I was done being humiliated. I was going to fight back. The special HOA meeting took place 3 days after we brought our newborn home. My wife was still recovering, our daughter sleeping in her bassinet beside the couch when I got the email. Attendance mandatory. I should have ignored it, but something inside me needed to face her, to make her see the pain she'd caused. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, the one with the framed slogan above the door, community cleanliness, character. It had never felt so ironic. When I walked in, Karen was already standing at the front, clipboard in hand, smiling like a politician. She wore her royal blue HOA uniform shirt, golden trim gleaming under the fluorescent lights. People filled the seats, murmuring. I recognized every face. Our mailman, the Jenkins couple, Mrs. Shaw from across the street. Karen tapped the mic. Thank you all for coming on short notice. Tonight, we're addressing the recent incident involving one of our residents and public behavior unbecoming of Maplewood Estates. A low murmur rippled through the room. I stood up. You mean my wife, the woman who was in labor when you barged into a hospital room. Her expression didn't falter. Mr. Carter, please, this is not personal. It's about standards. As HOA members, we represent this community everywhere we go. Even in a delivery room? I snapped. Laughter and gasps filled the space. A few neighbors exchanged looks, uncertain who to believe. Karen straightened her papers, pretending calm. Your wife's gown was open. There were male nurses present. That's indecent by your standards. I cut in. Not by law. Not by decency. You humiliated her while she was in labor. Her voice rose, shaky now. I was enforcing order. You were enforcing your ego. I shouted. Someone in the back clapped softly. Then another. Karen's composure cracked. She slammed her clipboard on the table. You don't belong in this community if you can't respect its values. The room went silent. For the first time, people were seeing the real her, the controlling woman behind the perfect smile. I took a step forward, calm but firm. Karen, you've crossed every line there is. You showed up at a hospital, harassed a pregnant woman, and then smeared her name. I'm done letting you bully this neighborhood. Her face flushed crimson. You'll regret this, Mr. Carter. I have connections. Good, I said. So do I. That night, I sent the nurse's video to the hospital board, the HOA, and the local police. By morning, it had already started spreading. The storm that was coming would strip Karen of everything she'd built her life on: reputation, power, and control. And it was about to begin. The morning after I sent that video, I woke up to chaos. My phone was exploding with notifications, emails, missed calls, even messages from neighbors who had once sided with Karen. The nurse's recording had gone viral in our community group overnight. In the clip, Karen's voice was crystal clear. You're still a resident of Maplewood Estates. Rules apply even here. Then came the image of my wife, crying, clutching her hospital gown, while nurses tried to push Karen out. The footage ended with Karen shouting, "Modesty matters," before the camera shook. I didn't release it publicly, someone else did. But by then, it was too late. Every homeowner had seen the truth. Karen tried to spin it immediately. She posted a long email claiming the video was doctored, that she was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by ungrateful residents. But her voice, her face, her arrogance, it was all right there in 4K. I wasn't interested in revenge. I just wanted peace. But the situation had already taken on a life of its own. Local news stations began sniffing around, and suddenly the HOA's iron wall of silence cracked. People who'd feared Karen for years started coming forward with stories. One neighbor wrote, "She fined me $500 because my daughter's wheelchair ramp was too steep." Another said, "She screamed at a teen lifeguard for not being professional enough at the pool." Every story painted the same picture: a woman who hid behind rules to feed her control. 2 days later, I got an email from Officer Daniels, the same cop who'd been at the hospital that night. "We're opening an investigation. Need you to come in tomorrow. Bring anything else you've got." When I showed up, he greeted me with a grim smile. "You might have just done more than get her suspended. This could go criminal, harassment, unlawful entry, even emotional distress." That's when I realized the trap Karen had set for us, her power, her manipulation, had flipped. The walls she'd built to control everyone were closing in around her. That night, I walked into our nursery. where Sarah rocked our daughter to sleep under the soft glow of a nightlight. The baby cooed gently, unaware of the storm she'd been born into. I whispered, "It's over soon." But I was wrong. Karen wasn't finished yet. The morning the police called me back, I thought it was over. I thought we'd finally close the chapter on Karen. But evil doesn't fade. Quietly, it tries to reclaim control. Sarah had been recovering well. The baby was healthy, sleeping more each night. For the first time in weeks, the air in our house smelled of peace, baby powder, warm formula, and the faint scent of fresh coffee. Then, right around noon, a loud bang rattled our front door. Karen. She stood there in her HOA uniform, royal blue shirt, golden trim gleaming in the sunlight, as if she'd come to conduct another inspection, but her face was twisted, her eyes red and wild. "Open the door," she shouted, pounding harder. "You think you can humiliate me? You think I'm finished?" I cracked the door slightly, my phone recording. "Karen, you need to leave." Her voice rose, shrill and furious. "You ruined my reputation. The board turned on me. Everyone's calling me a monster because of your little video." I stayed calm. "Karen, you did that to yourself." She leaned closer, spit flying as she yelled, "You set me up. You and that nurse. I'll make sure your wife regrets ever." Before she could finish, Sarah appeared behind me, holding the baby. "Please," she said softly, "just go home." That's when Karen lost it. She reached forward, grabbed the edge of Sarah's hospital gown, the same one she'd worn home for comfort, and yanked. The fabric tore slightly at the neckline. Sarah gasped, clutching it tight against her chest, trembling. I stepped between them, voice shaking with fury. "You touch her again, and I'll have you arrested." Karen sneered. "Arrested? For protecting community standards?" At that moment, our baby started crying. The sound filled the doorway, a raw, helpless wail that sliced through the tension. Even Karen froze. For a brief second, something human flickered in her eyes. Then, like a storm snapping back, she pointed at us and hissed, "You people don't belong here." From the corner of my eye, I saw flashing lights, red and blue washing over the driveway. Two officers stepped out of their cruiser, hands raised cautiously. "Ma'am, step back," one shouted. Karen turned, eyes wide. "They're lying. They're trying to ruin me." The second officer gently pulled Sarah back inside, while the first restrained Karen. She kicked and screamed, shouting about false accusations and freedom of enforcement. The baby's cries echoed as the door finally closed between us. Inside, Sarah collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Her hospital gown still trembled in her grip. I could smell the faint sweetness of the baby lotion mixed with the cold sweat of fear. Through the window, we watched them lead Karen away in handcuffs, her HOA badge glinting under the afternoon sun. The neighborhood stood still, neighbors peeking from blinds, phones filming. For once, no one dared to defend her. Sarah whispered, "Why would she do this? What kind of person does that?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that a woman obsessed with control had finally lost it. And she'd done it on camera. Before you hear what happened next, tell me, if someone humiliated your family in front of the world, would you forgive them? Or would you fight to make sure justice was served? Because what came next wasn't just about Karen's arrest. It was about making sure she could never hurt anyone again. After Karen's arrest, silence took over Maplewood Estates, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort but echoes. The street that once hummed with gossip now felt like a pause movie. Every curtain was half drawn, every neighbor cautious, pretending they hadn't just witnessed our HOA president being led away in handcuffs. Inside our home, things weren't quiet at all. Sarah couldn't stop shaking. Every time the baby cried, she'd flinch like she was hearing Karen's voice again. I'd wake up at night to find her sitting on the nursery floor, gown clutched to her chest, whispering. She grabbed me. I couldn't breathe. The police came back the next day for follow-up statements. Officer Daniels was kind but professional. "She's being charged with trespassing, harassment, and assault," he said, his tone even. "You did the right thing recording everything." I nodded, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like aftermath, the kind where justice and trauma share the same room. That night, I stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled faintly of rain and cedar mulch. Across the street, Karen's porch light still glowed, though her car was gone. A moving van idled near her driveway. I could see her son, maybe 14, packing boxes, his face pale, embarrassed, maybe even angry. For a moment, I felt something unexpected, pity, but then I remembered the way my wife's gown tore in her hands, the way our newborn cried between screams and sirens. Pity faded fast. A few neighbors approached over the next few days, their voices hushed guilty. "We're sorry, man. We should have stopped her a long time ago. Didn't think she'd actually go that far." They meant well, but I didn't know how to respond. How do you explain that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting? Sarah began therapy soon after. The hospital offered counseling for trauma victims, and slowly, very slowly, she began sleeping again. Sometimes I'd find her standing in the baby's room, humming softly under the nightlight glow. Our daughter's tiny hand curled around her finger. One night, she said, "I just want her to understand what she did. She will," I told her. "The court will make sure of it." But deep down, I knew the court couldn't fix everything. Some scars don't fade, they just grow quieter. Still, we were finally breathing again. And soon, we'd be ready to face her one last time. This time, in a courtroom full of witnesses. The next week unfolded like a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and questions. The Maplewood scandal, as local media had begun calling it, had turned our quiet suburb into a case file. Officer Daniels called us down to the precinct for formal statements. The waiting room smelled of old coffee and printer ink, the hum of the air conditioner louder than it should have been. Sarah sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, wedding ring gleaming under the fluorescent light. When it was our turn, Daniels led us into a small office lined with evidence boxes. He closed the door softly. "We've reviewed the footage," he said, voice steady. "There's no question this was harassment and assault. The prosecutor's office is preparing charges." Sarah's voice wavered. "She'll go to jail?" "Possibly probation first, given her record," he admitted, "but she'll lose her HOA position, and her name will be public record." It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt hollow, like the cost of justice was higher than we could afford. The hospital also launched its own internal review. We met with administrators who apologized profusely. "No one should have gotten past security like that," one said, his tone full of shame. They showed us new procedures, locked maternity floors, camera upgrades, stricter visitor policies. All because of Karen. Meanwhile, the police gathered witness statements. The nurse who'd filmed the incident testified, along with two others who'd heard Karen shouting community standards from the hallway. The footage became evidence, sealed in a case file marked State versus Karen Whitmore. I'll never forget the day the DA called. His voice was crisp, decisive. "We're pressing full charges. The community deserves to see accountability." When I hung up, Sarah exhaled shakily, as if she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "It's really happening," she whispered. That night, the baby slept peacefully for the first time in days. The rhythmic sound of her breathing was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. But every time I closed my eyes, I still saw Karen's face, red with rage, eyes filled with twisted conviction. Justice was coming, yes, but it wasn't over yet, because soon she'd stand in a courtroom full of people, the same ones she'd once ruled over, and the truth would finally be shown to everyone. And this time, she wouldn't be holding a clipboard. She'd be holding her own downfall. The day of the hearing, the courthouse felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was the weight of everything that had led us here. The marble floors echoed beneath, every step, each one sounding heavier than the last. Sarah held my arm as we walked down the hall, her other hand cradling our daughter's photo on her phone. She wasn't ready to bring the baby into this world again, at least not this part of it. I could still smell the faint trace of her floral lotion mixed with anxiety. When we entered the courtroom, I froze. Karen was already there. She sat at the defense table, no HOA badge, no clipboard, just a woman stripped of her authority. But even without her uniform, she held her chin high, eyes darting toward the cameras from local news crews waiting quietly in the back row. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering, but Karen's lips were pressed into a thin line of bitterness. The bailiff's voice broke the tension. All rise. Judge Moore took her seat. A calm woman in her 50s, she adjusted her glasses and looked at the file before her. Case number 8729, State versus Karen Whitmore. The prosecutor began. Your Honor, this case is about a woman's abuse of perceived authority. The defendant entered a hospital room uninvited, verbally assaulted a patient in labor, and later returned to the victim's home to continue her harassment. Karen's lawyer rose, smoothly. My client had no criminal intent. She acted under stress, believing she was enforcing community rules. The judge raised an eyebrow. In a maternity ward, the defense faltered. Then it was our turn. The prosecutor called me to the stand first. My heart hammered as I took the oath and sat down. The wood of the witness chair was cold against my palms. Mr. Carter, the prosecutor began, can you describe what the defendant did that night at the hospital? I took a deep breath. She barged into my wife's room while she was in labor. She screamed at her to cover herself, said she was embarrassing the community. My wife was terrified. The courtroom murmured. Do you recognize this footage? The prosecutor asked, holding up a tablet. I nodded. That's from the nurse's phone. They played it. The sound of Karen's voice filled the room. Rules apply, even here. You'll thank me later, dear, modesty matters. Each word echoed like a confession. The jury's expressions hardened. Even the judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Karen's lawyer stood for cross-examination, but could barely find footing. You admit your wife's gown was open? She was giving birth. I replied sharply. What did you expect her to wear? A business suit? Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even the bailiff cracked a smile before catching himself. When Sarah took the stand next, the atmosphere shifted. Her voice trembled but didn't break. She grabbed me, she said quietly. I was holding my stomach trying to breathe, and she kept yelling. I thought I was going to lose my baby. Karen's composure finally cracked. She stood up mid-testimony. That's not true. She's exaggerating. I was helping Mrs. Whitmore. Sit down, the judge snapped, gavel slamming once. Silence. The rest of the hearing unfolded like the unmasking of a tyrant. Emails, witness statements, footage. All of it piled up like bricks around Karen's fortress of denial. By the time closing arguments came, the defense had nothing left to stand on. The judge's final words cut through the air. Mrs. Whitmore, your sense of authority does not excuse cruelty. You abused power and violated personal dignity. This court finds you guilty on all charges. The gavel struck. Karen flinched. As deputies approached to escort her out, she looked back once. Eyes wet, face pale. For the first time, I didn't see an HOA president. I saw a woman finally realizing that control doesn't equal respect. The verdict hit the courtroom like a final thunderclap, loud, decisive, and impossible to ignore. The sound of the gavel still rang in my ears long after the judge dismissed everyone. For months, Karen had stood above us, dictating how we lived, what we built, even what we wore. Now she sat small and silent, her once perfect posture folded into itself. Sarah and I stayed seated as people began filing out. The air felt charged, half relief, half disbelief. I looked at Karen, expecting another glare, another outburst. But instead, she looked lost. The woman who once strutted through our neighborhood with her clipboard and rules now seemed hollow, like a statue cracked at the base. The deputies guided her toward the door, but before they reached it, she turned her head. You think you've won, she said quietly, almost to herself. You've destroyed me. I was just trying to keep order. I stood, every muscle tight. Order doesn't come from humiliating people, Karen. It comes from compassion, and you never had any. Her eyes glistened. For the first time, I saw something like guilt in them. Then she whispered, I didn't mean to hurt her. You grabbed a woman in labor, I said, voice low but steady. You meant every word. The deputies motioned her forward, but the room had already gone silent. Even the reporter in the back stopped typing. As she disappeared through the door, Sarah slipped her hand into mine. Her touch was warm, trembling but firm. "It's over," she whispered. Outside, the sunlight felt almost unreal, bright, sharp, and cleansing. Reporters swarmed near the steps, but I kept walking. Sarah leaned on me, the courthouse marble glinting behind us like the closing of a long, painful chapter. The next morning, the headlines hit. HOA president convicted in hospital assault case. Community reconsiders leadership after viral harassment incident. Karen's picture was everywhere, her expression not proud or angry anymore, just broken. The HOA issued a public apology, promising reforms, new leadership, and a renewed commitment to empathy. For once, those words actually meant something. A week later, we received a letter from a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in months. It said simply, "You reminded all of us what real strength looks like. Thank you." I showed it to Sarah while she fed our daughter. She smiled softly, tears in her eyes. "We didn't ask to be strong," she said. "We just didn't have a choice." I nodded. That's what makes it real. That night, I stood outside on our porch, watching the streetlights flicker across the quiet cul-de-sac. The world felt different, lighter somehow. The sound of crickets replaced Karen's voice, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without tension. Justice had been served. But what lingered wasn't triumph, it was peace. Karen had built her kingdom on control, and in trying to police everyone else's lives, she'd lost her own. It's been 6 months since that day in court, and life finally feels quiet again. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache, the kind that means peace. The HOA replaced Karen with a new board, one that actually listens. They sent an official letter to every homeowner apologizing for the leadership misconduct and promising to rebuild trust. For the first time since we'd moved to Maplewood Estates, the neighborhood barbecue wasn't about gossip or rules. It was about people. Families laughed again. Kids rode bikes past our yard without fear of fines. And at the center of it all was Sarah, stronger, calmer, radiant again. I still remember the first morning she stepped outside in her robe, holding our daughter, unafraid. The sun poured across the porch, warm and golden, catching the tiny curls of our baby's hair. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that said we survived. The faint scent of lavender from her coffee mug mixed with the fresh-cut grass, simple, ordinary things that finally felt like blessings. Karen's house sits empty now. For sale sign out front, blinds drawn. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of her son returning to pick up mail. I don't feel anger anymore, just a strange mix of pity and closure. A few weeks ago, we got a letter from the county clerk's office. Karen had agreed to a plea deal, community service, therapy, and permanent removal from any HOA leadership position. Attached to it was a short, handwritten note from her. "I'm sorry for what I did to your wife. I was wrong. I let pride blind me." Sarah read it twice, then set it down. She didn't say anything, just sighed quietly and looked at the baby. "Let's forgive her," she said softly, "for our daughter's sake." And just like that, it was done. That evening, we took a walk, our first real walk as a family of 3. The street was lined with warm porch lights, crickets singing under the trees. Our daughter giggled as Sarah held her close. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt since all of this began. Hope. Before we went inside, I glanced once more at the empty house down the block. I whispered, not out of anger, but out of finality, "May you find peace too, Karen." Because sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about learning. And sometimes healing means walking away, holding on to love instead of hate. In the end, our story wasn't about Karen's cruelty. It was about my wife's strength, about a community rediscovering its heart, and about how, even after the ugliest storms, the light always returns.